I had a choice today on how much of the gospel I would read. See, in some congregations, they will listen to the entire Passion story all the way to the end, to the death of Jesus. Here at Gloria Day, we will hear that part of the story on Friday night. But here's the catch. See, some of you, for some reason or another, won't make it Friday night. And that's the dilemma for today. Because we all need to hear the entire story before Easter. Before the lilies and the trumpets, before the shouts of joy and the discovery of the empty tomb, we must first encounter the betrayal and the desertion, the pain and the despair. Because without the whole story, what would the meaning of Easter be for us? So I hope if you can't come Friday, or even if you do, you will finish reading the story for yourself. Entering the darkness and despair, entering the agony and the loneliness, just for a little while, before you come into the bright light and joy of Easter. So back to my choice about the gospel. The idea of where do we begin and where do we end the story for today? Well, the answer is betrayal. The story begins and ends in betrayal. Judas stands before the chief priest, accepting 30 pieces of silver to betray Jesus, the man he had been following for 3 years, the man he had pinned his hopes on, the man he believed to have been the one who would break Israel out of Roman captivity, the one he believed was the promised Messiah. Now, did Judas really realize what his actions were going to lead to? Did he really ever believe that an arrest and a trial would end in crucifixion and death? Or did he instead hope that maybe the arrest of Jesus might cause an uprising and a revolt? That this might finally get the ball rolling and force the Messiah's hand to rally those adoring crowds into a rebellion against Rome? Did Judas himself feel betrayed by his own hope in Jesus? His hopes after 3 years not seeming to bear any fruit. I mean, Jesus telling the same parables in every town, a healing there, a casting out of a demon here, some amazing stuff, and that crowds were growing. The word was spreading, so now had to be the time. Jesus rode into town on that ridiculous little donkey, and the people lining the streets went wild. Now was for sure the time, wasn't it? I mean, it had to be. But nothing. Jesus had so far done nothing. Well, not exactly nothing. I mean, Judas's hopes were perhaps raised a little when Jesus drove the money changers out of the temple and then got into a verbal scuffle with the scribes and the priests. But since that day, only more parables and teaching. So why not force some action? Why not capitalize on this momentum he seems to have? Surely the crowd would protest and rise up to get Jesus out of trouble. Yes, Judas's hopes had betrayed him. Jesus wasn't turning out to be the sort of Messiah that countless years of prophecy seemed to describe. There's a saying that hurt people hurt people. Judas's feelings of betrayal perhaps now have led him from being the betrayed to becoming the betrayer. It seems so because there he is at the end of the story, with the same ones who paid him the silver. He's walking with them under cover of the night and leading them straight to Jesus, sealing the betrayal of all things with a kiss. The intimate greeting of one friend to another, the intimate greeting of a disciple to a rabbi, his teacher, a kiss of betrayal. And the story doesn't just begin and end in betrayal. The whole story is full of it. although it's called by a few different names. See, Peter will deny, and the disciples can't stay awake. And finally, all will be deserters, a flock scattered as the shepherd is struck down. So this is what I can share with you about betrayal. I've been on both sides. I've been both the betrayer and the betrayed. And it's awful, no matter how you slice it. I mean, as the betrayed one, I can only describe it as a kind of grief, a brokenheartedness, a feeling of falling as the sure footing of a trusted relationship is just pulled right out from under you. And as the betrayer, well, a sick remorse, right in the pit of your stomach, a nagging sorrow for being the one who's the cause of such deep hurt for another. Mostly betraying with actions or words, but also sometimes with my lack of action or words. The betrayer as deserter, not bothering to show up or speak up. And I'm certain there have been those I've betrayed without even knowing it at the time. But if I think back now, I could see how they would feel betrayed or deserted or denied. And I suspect that this is true for you all as well. You've been on both sides of the coin. You are betrayers who have also been betrayed. When our hopes are betrayed, it breaks us down. And it's a terrible combination. Lost hopes mixed with a sense of betrayal. When a relationship is broken, we experience that combination. The hopes for the future of a life shared together are lost. Betrayed by a close friend who suddenly just drops out of our life with no explanation. Or a spouse who calls a lawyer instead of first calling a marriage counselor. Or the loss of a job, which isn't just the loss of a job, it's the loss of security and identity and our sense of purpose in the world. Betrayed by a company and the American dream after years of loyal service. Or betrayed by a body that's aging, with eyes that can't see and ears that can't hear and legs that are unsteady. Or betrayed by a younger body, one that should be well and strong but isn't, falling prey to a chronic illness. Or betrayed as a child by the abuse of a trusted adult, or sexually harassed by a coworker, or physically harmed by a loved one or spouse. And our deeply held beliefs can betray us too. Believing in a version of what is good and true and right, but then watching a whole different version of that enacted out on the world stage. Finding yourself identifying with a political party or a faith that no longer seems to follow those same ideals. And as betrayers, well, it runs the gamut, doesn't it? Sneaking in after curfew, cheating on a test, lying to cover a mistake, gossiping, infidelity, betraying the environment with wasteful, irresponsible behavior. Or perhaps the most often rationalized one, saving our own skin by sacrificing someone else. There are so many big and little ways that we have thrown someone under the bus. So that's what I can tell you about betrayal. Both sides, the betrayed and the betrayer. But now here's what I can tell you about Jesus. See, while Judas might have been betrayed by his hopes in Jesus, it was never really Jesus who betrayed those hopes. Jesus was true to who he was as the Son of God, Emmanuel, God with us, never faltering from his purpose or God's will. Jesus, whose very name means that he is one who saves. Defeating Rome wouldn't defeat the underlying cause of Rome's oppression of Israel. the abuse of power, the lack of compassion, that isn't just the Roman Empire. It's inherent in the brokenness of the world. And Jesus has come to save the world. And so he endures betrayal, breaking that cycle of hurt, the cycle of the betrayed becoming the betrayer. See, what God is up to is always about more than what we think or believe. And so throughout this part of the story, from beginning to end, we see Jesus is loving and forgiving his betrayer. Judas is included with all the rest of the disciples for that Passover meal, receiving the bread and the wine with all of the others, a participant in the first of all first communions. Jesus includes Judas and all of them, Peter the denier, the rest of the sleepy deserters. They're all recipients of what Jesus says is a new covenant, a promise of the forgiveness of sins. And they will all be in need of this gift of grace before the night is through. Then in the garden, at the close of this part of the story, when Judas arrives to greet Jesus with a kiss, betrayed by the signal of an intimate greeting, but Jesus calls Judas friend. Friend, can you imagine? Jesus accepts his kiss. When we are the betrayed one, Jesus is with us, right beside us in those moments of grief and sadness when trust is destroyed and hopes are dashed and relationships are lost. Jesus walks into that darkness with us, and he doesn't doze off in the longest hour of our sleepless nights, but he endures the pain. He doesn't sell us out or take the easier path. Even in the moments of doubt and fear, when the pain is too much to bear, when we feel as though, yes, even Jesus has left our side, we can cry out to him as he cried out to God in the garden and on the cross. And when we are the betrayer, Jesus includes us in the meal, in the promise, in the covenant of forgiveness. He accepts our kiss, and he calls us friend, and he doesn't turn away. He breaks that cycle of the betrayed becoming the betrayer. His grace is bigger than our brokenness. So I guess I need to change what I said earlier. You know, that thing I said about choosing where the story begins and ends. I said it begins and ends with betrayal. But see, that's only if the story is left up to Judas or Peter or to you and me. But thanks be to God that the story is left up to Jesus. And it's because of Jesus that part of the story I chose really begins and ends with grace. The grace of Emmanuel, God with us, enduring the grief and pain of betrayal and never leaving us alone with it. The grace of our Lord and host, inviting us to his table of forgiveness, accepting our kiss, and calling us friend. And this is just part of the story. So be sure to witness the whole thing, from beginning to end. God's grace will meet you there. Amen.